goal. If you ever posted anything anti-Islamic on social media, you have not only contributed to extremism, you have become an extremist yourself. The Islamophobe is the terrorist's greatest supporter and most effective recruiter. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And I look at
Yeah.
that, and a couple of thoughts come to my mind, and maybe I'd like your feedback on it, is us having hatred towards terrorists is not really the goal of the terrorists. The goal of the terrorists is to kill and terrify.
Yeah. They don't really care what we think about them, because whether we're Islamophobic or not. I mean, look at they're equal opportunity murderers, and the left will find this out one day. They'll find this out one day if they ever get their way, and suddenly the jihadists are in charge of everything, because the leftists will be the first ones on the chopping block for some of their liberal beliefs. But yeah, this blame the victim attitude is very prominent even among a lot of religious figures. I just last night read an editorial from Bill Donahue, who is the head of the Catholic League. It's the country's largest Catholic civil rights organization, and his editorial was called "Muslims Are Right to Be Angry," and he really was he said very strongly in there that we should not tolerate, as he put it, the intolerance that provoked this violent reaction. So now imagine, look, this is the equivalent of saying that rape victims were asking for it by the way they dressed, which would set people off, which would set off head explodings everywhere if you were to say such a thing. But for some reason, it's culturally acceptable to blame the victims of Islamic fundamentalism for provoking their own murders. It's a rather sickening approach, and it's a submissive, suicidal approach. We need to be unrepentantly intolerant of intolerance, and
I love
we
that.
need to, and because the intolerant people will ultimately destroy you. They will ultimately kill you.
Yeah, I mean, it's like thinking about your analogy to a rape victim. It's almost like saying, well, everybody does have a sexual impulse, and so you can kind of understand where the rapist is coming from, sort of.
It's just this attitude that we mustn't provoke this kind of violence is completely wrong-headed. It's completely backwards. The violence must not be acceptable. It must not be tolerated. Once again, it's blaming the victim. It is a culturally suicidal stance to take, and unfortunately, you see that a lot, and you see it in a lot of religious figures who should be the last people, standing up for Islam. If this culture of ours, with Western civilization, doesn't get more of a unified front against its enemies, then we will succumb. We will eventually submit and surrender to a force that is most definitely culturally unified.
Right.
And
It
Mark, you know
reminds
what?
me. Oh, just one sec, Mike. It reminds me, a mutual friend of ours, Mark, on his Facebook wall, he posted the article. It was a Robert Spencer at Jihad Watch wrote an article, and the picture was, it says, the New York Daily News pixelated the Muhammad cartoon. So they showed the editor and publisher of Charlie Hebdo holding up the newspaper, but the New York Daily News had pixelated the cartoon so that in their article you couldn't see what the cartoon was. And our buddy, his comment when he reposted Robert Spencer's article, he said simply that fear emboldens evil, and that's exactly right. These folks, by overarching sensitivity and being concerned that we're too insensitive, is not going to have the effect of relaxing them and having them think, okay, good, they're getting our message. And
Yeah.
anything, what his point was is that it's going to embolden those kind of activities because it's basically smelling fear in the water.
That is absolutely right, and that's absolutely the attitude that our Islamic enemies will take. Is that we've if they've given us an inch, we're going to take a mile. And you have to understand that it's not just these are not people with coexist stickers on their Priuses. These are people who will not rest until the world is living under an Islamic caliphate and under Sharia law. And Sharia law has blasphemy laws. We don't, but blasphemy laws are presumably derived from divine power, and so they must be enforced. Um, so it will, and that's why those people died at the Charlie Hebdo offices yesterday. We must resist this notion of blasphemy law rather than paving into it, because blurring out those images essentially tells the fundamentalists, you win, we are obeying your blasphemy laws.
Yeah.
You know what? I mean, probably purposefully, many on the left, you mentioned Sharia, Mark, and I think that to the low information folks, so maybe again purposely, many folks I think conflate Sharia with just the Islamists, the radicals. And anyone who reads Sharia, I've read quite a bit about it, I'm sure you have as well, understands that, even if these folks misinterpret the Quran and Sharia and fly planes into buildings, there are hundreds of millions of Muslims across the country who don't. And it gets back to, the things that we talked about earlier that aren't sawing off heads. Let me ask you a quick question. We've mentioned on the show, you mentioned it a bit earlier, Islamophobia. Liz Harrison on this network yesterday said this as, I've talked about this a bit in the past, but said it very well. There is no such thing as Islamophobia. Phobia being irrational fear of something, right?
Right.
We have a right and a and a history of good reason to fear a lot of what's going on.
Right. I've said this for years and years, that there is no such thing as Islamophobia. There is an increasingly legitimate concern. Like, as you pointed out, it's not an irrational fear. It's an increasingly legitimate concern about the rising tide of Islamic fundamentalism and the violence and intolerance associated with it. But look, that term Islamophobia was actually created by the Muslim Brotherhood. They took a look at the success that gays had with the word homophobia, and they modeled it after that word because they knew that it would be. They knew that American sensibilities would respond to that notion, and it's been very successful. I mean, so now that if you're a critic of Islamic fundamentalism, you're automatically just dismissed as an Islamophobe, which delegitimizes you and anything you might have to say. It's the same, in racial terms. It's the same as if you were shutting someone down with the label racist.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's
what that ends up doing is that ends the conversation. I mean, on one hand,
exactly right.
I've been accused of having Amishophobia because every time I've been in Pennsylvania, I've been terrified that Amish farmers were going to hack my head off.
And rightly
on the
so.
other hand, if I were in Pakistan, being concerned that I would be abducted, or maybe not Pakistan, probably Pakistan or Afghanistan or Uzbekistan or Syria, or I mean, how many countries can we go down the list to be captured and have that? That would not be a phobia to be concerned about that in that case, whereas walking around Pennsylvania concerned about the Amish, that would be.
Well, we've reached the point now where we need to be concerned where we do live in the West. It's not, it's not only in countries ruled by Sharia. It's not only some of the extremist countries, but now we have to be cautious in our own countries in the West about potential acts of terrorism. Sydney, Australia found that out a month or so ago. France has been finding it out for a long time. It's a legitimate concern. It has nothing to do with a sort of irrational fear or knee-jerk bigotry. We're way past that.
Right. Now, do you think, let me ask you this, Mark, at what point do the French, because they've been, as Mike and I were talking earlier about Stein's book, America Alone, and he talks a lot about France and cultural transformation that's been going on there. I mean, I look at all these people in Lyon, in France, with what is it, Je suis Charlie or Je suis, what is it, that meme that's kind of going all around now?
I am, doesn't it?
Yeah, but at what point is there going to be somebody to say, hey, you know what? There is an aspect of this that was a predictable consequence to our hyper-tolerance and hypersensitivity towards offending these folks. Will there be some sort of realism? I mean, all these people standing around with these signs and candles going, hey, you know what? We're kind of a bit we have some responsibility in this.
I think the average citizen in Europe, in Australia, and even here in America, I think the average citizen gets it and has gotten it for a long time. And the problem is our politicians and our intellectual elites and our media. These are people who have been defending and promoting multiculturalism for a long time. But for a while now in Europe, you've been starting to see these protest marches, especially and most prominently, I guess, in Germany now, where they have thousands and thousands more each time it happens. But they've been ordinary citizens marching against Islamic fundamentalism and immigration and stuff like this. And of course, the media concern is that this will embolden far-right groups. I've been saying for a long time that this is what it was going to take is the average citizen on the street pushing back, because our leaders and our intellectual elites are not going to do it. So it's I personally think it's going to reach the point where there's literally violence in the streets in terms of dealing with the Islam problem and the immigration problem in Europe.
Mark?
So it's going to be ugly.
And speaking of Germany, Angela Merkel, right, last week, warning German citizenry not to stage anti-Muslim rallies. In effect, support. It's just going to get a hell of a lot worse there, I think, my friend, before it gets better throughout Europe.
Absolutely. Merkel herself a while back said, she'd come to the realization that multiculturalism has failed, and you're starting to hear that from some of the politicians in Europe. But maybe too little too late. I hope not, but as you said, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Exactly. Hey, listen, man, we, believe it or not, we are out of time. And as is always the case, we appreciate the heck out of you coming on and sharing your insight.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you, man. All right, this is
I enjoy
the
being
Right
had.
Mikes. Pardon me?
Sorry, I said thanks for having me. I enjoy being had.
Yeah, well, so as are we on a daily basis.
Phrasing.
Anyway, this is the Right Mics with Mike Miller and Michael Howsam. Howsam, dude, what's the Bloomberg thing about?
You know what? I just saw this on Facebook. Because I only pay attention to when Mark answers questions that I ask. And as soon as you're talking, I kind of move on. But Rush Limbaugh just posted this.
I'll try to get a word in edgewise with you there, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, good job. Rush Limbaugh just posted this, that Bloomberg News has a story. The reason we don't have the reason is we don't have strict enough gun control laws in France. Over the break, I'm going to see if I can try to find that.
Yeah, because that's completely hilarious. Because even as we talked yesterday, John Dean alluded to France's gun control laws. So we will definitely have to get into that. Again, this is the Right Mics with Mike Miller and Michael Howsam. Do not go away. The last half hour will be as fun as the previous two. Don't go anywhere.